And we're on.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Giant Steps, the new podcast with Doug Van Dorn. And with me is my awesome producer and co-host, Rudy Landa. And you know, Rudy, today we're going to bring in one of my good buds, Brian Godawa. And we're going to have some fun with this one, I think.
Absolutely, man. Excited to do it. Let's bring him in right now.
Get him in. Brian.
Hey, guys.
What's going on, Brian? Welcome.
Good to be here.
Excited for this, man. Like, this is a brand new podcast, so you're like our second guest.
Cool. There's a lot of times where I've been the first guest on show. It's like people like to practice on me, practice on the questionable ones. And so we'll have it right when we get the good guests.
All right. Well, for those who don't know Brian, a little bit of introduction here. You know, Brian and I have been on a couple of different podcasts together. We did the Pure Normal podcast when Dr. Heiser was alive and Natalie, and unfortunately both of them have passed away. So that's a dead podcast. But we've also been doing Iron and Myth now for, 20 months or something like that. So that's been going pretty good. Enjoying that one.
Mm. Yeah. Good
Brian
stuff.
is a Hollywood producer, writer. Prolific, you produce scripts.
Yeah, there you go. I say that because I have contempt for Hollywood producers.
He's a script writer. He's an author. Lived out in LA for quite a while. How long did you live out there, Brian?
Oh, almost 30 years.
30 years. Before that, you're a Midwest boy, and then you decided you really, really wanted to move to Colorado, and then you saw our politics and said, I don't think so. So now you're down in Texas.
That is literally what happened.
I know it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
When we were in LA and we're like, we got to get the heck out of here. It's going down the tube. The riots were down our street. And I'm like, and so we set out, I want to be in a state that's not, look, I realize that, there are sinners and bad people everywhere. So you're not going to escape bad people. And I want to bring the gospel to everybody. So it's not that. It's more about having a safer environment where your life isn't in danger, or the governance of the state is not going to, is not out to destroy you, literally, as the middle class person, whether it's with taxes, but also laws that benefit criminals and criminalize innocents, innocent law keepers like myself that they would penalize me instead. So we started looking around, it was like Texas, Colorado, Tennessee, Florida, and we, slowly, canceled each one out. But Colorado was definitely, it was already going too far purple, and Denver was almost like LA. Now, The truth is Houston and Austin are like little LAs. So that's the fact. So, but yes, then we ended up choosing Dallas just because it's the least far down the line in terms of destruction.
Absolutely. We got all these people in our church who just constantly want to move away from Colorado. And I would be doing the same thing, but I tell them, this is my island.
Yes.
I'm not leaving until they train me.
So I decided when we came to Texas, I'm like, this is going to be my Alamo. I'll go down fighting here. I wasn't able to fight in LA. I mean, you have no voice, you have no authority, no power, no influence. Your vote doesn't mean anything if you are a conservative or a Christian, and worse if you're both. And so at least in Texas, I can do things. And in fact, as soon as we got here, I saw wokeness coming into my church and through critical race theory, and I jumped on it, and we got it out.
Really?
So, praise God. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, man. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's creeping in everywhere. There's really no, it's up to people to do something.
Brian, you've written so many books. Hollywood Worldviews is the book I first heard about you from. You were on the White Horse Inn, I don't know, it's probably 20 years ago or something like that. And talking about this book, and I'm like, wow, you got a Hollywood writer who's writing about how to think Christianly about the movies, and you're on a Reform podcast. And, you know, it just kind of tucked away in the back of my mind. And then we ended up meeting really providentially as you were writing your Chronicles of the Nephilim and stuff like that. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about your Hollywood Worldviews book, why you wrote it, what it's done for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Hollywood Worldviews was sort of when I first wrote that book, it was almost the first of its kind, pretty much. You know, now there's a lot of books written by Christians about movies and film and stuff like that, and that's all great. But at the time, I was, as a writer in Hollywood, I was developing my own, what you call in philosophy an aesthetic, which means it's my philosophy of beauty. It's my theology of beauty, actually. I was seeking to understand storytelling as a Hollywood screenwriter. I was learning all about storytelling through Hollywood story gurus. And I had noticed that what the nature of story structure itself, which is oriented towards redemption, that is redemption of a protagonist or hero as they set off on a journey to vanquish an enemy or accomplish a goal. And through that journey, they learn something about themselves that's wrong about the way they live or see the world. And when they, have that self-revelation of their own inner flaw, they become redeemed, they change, and they get the, shall we say, the inner strength in order to vanquish the outer foe, the villain at the very end, that kind of a thing. And I noticed that a lot of what they were saying was very much sounded like my Christian, like a Christian testimony, the way I had learned to tell my Christian testimony. And also a lot of the paradigms, such as the hero's journey. Most people now have heard of Joseph Campbell, and he was, of course, a relativist who believed in mythology and didn't believe in Christianity, but he talked about the hero's journey and how that led to, to ultimate failure and a death and a resurrection and a return with the elixir, and that journey itself also was reflective of the Christ myth. And I realized that storytelling is about redemption. Now, it's not necessarily Christian redemption, because you can place any philosophy into the paradigm of redemption that you want. And for another way of seeing the paradigm of redemption is as the storyline of creation, fall, redemption, consummation. And that's actually a storyline. And so storytelling itself actually follows that paradigm. And so when I realized that, I saw what was the power behind storytelling that had affected me for so long in my life with movies and television and such. And it was a powerful revelation that I wanted to share with the church, with anybody who was a religious person who wanted to appreciate movies more. And in some ways at that time in the church, not so much now, but at that time in the church, there was a strong dichotomy in the body of Christ. Now there still is to some degrees, where Christians react to media, to culture, particularly, my area of expertise, which was, of course, movies and television. And they respond with one of two extremes usually, which is the cultural anorexic, what I call the cultural anorexic. That's the person who says, oh, there's too much sex and violence in movies. It's bad. It's all bad. And so they don't watch any of it or don't expose themselves to any of it. And the other extreme that might say, it's just entertainment. What's the big deal? So there's a few bad things. Or maybe it's like, I'm free in Christ, so I can watch anything I want and it's not going to hurt me. And so I felt like there were both extremes that I wanted to help both sides to appreciate movies and television more, and at the same time, develop an ability to discern the good from the bad. Because the truth is that all art is a mixture of good and bad, just like all sermons are a mixture of good and bad, right? You can have, no one's perfect. That's the bottom line. And so even though you may have a lot of bad movies out there, and it's gotten worse in Hollywood for sure, but there's still a lot of good that still comes through, even to this day, I have to admit. Even with the wokeness that has captured Hollywood, there are still filmmakers who are flying in under the radar or able to stand up and get their visions accomplished that have some good elements to them, right? And so I wanted to help the body of Christ have a better appreciation. And I also believe that the more that you know and understand, it's sort of like art appreciation, right? The more, say you go to an art appreciation for music or a painting class or something, and they teach you all the components of painting or of music and harmony and dissonance and all this, you can then become more intelligent as you listen to music or as you look at a painting. Well, it's the same way with movies. It's like if you understand what we storytellers are doing when we're telling a story, you'll have more knowledge that you can appreciate it more, but you can also discern what they're doing. And if it's bad or negative, you're not as likely to be affected by something if you can see what they're trying to do. If you just watch a movie and let it wash over you, you're going to be led by the storytellers into their paradigm through an emotional / experiential sort of metaphysic, not metaphysic, I'd say maybe an epistemology. The story draws you in, you root for the hero, and as you do so, you are opening yourself up to what the storytellers are telling you about life and how it should be lived through that hero's journey that you are identifying with. And that's sort of the basic, paradigm that I was trying to communicate through the book. And yeah, because, it still is a good seller after 25 years because I've updated it. And also they use it in Christian schools to teach, in Christian film schools and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a way for me to put down into paper what I was wrestling with myself as the storyteller, as the artist. And then that launched me, that was right around the time when my first movie got made, To End All Wars. Well, actually, it was shortly after that.
There's so many ways that I could go with this. I mean, we were joking around, how long to be on this podcast. You're like, you give me 10 hours. We could probably do that, Brian, if you wanted to, but, just thinking about,
I changed my mind. No,
no 10 hours.
Let's keep it to 7 or 8.
Suppers at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it as a pastor, and thinking about scripture, you go to the arc of creation and fall, redemption, and it's a completely biblical storyline. But my experience, at least up until pretty recently, I think, has been that most people will read the Bible as either kind of a manual for living or something, or as just like a theology book, a systematic theology book. And I think what you're in drawing on this idea of creation and fall, redemption, that's something that goes all the way back to the beginning of storytelling. And for us as Christians, it goes back to the very beginning of our Bibles, and learning to think about the Word of God as a story, first and foremost. How do you think that fits into the way people tell stories, a biblical story to the way people tell stories, and what it is like when you don't know anything about story and you just read the Bible, does it wash over you? or do you need to understand something about storytelling even when you read the Bible?
Well, that's a complex question. How dare you?
That's why I said 10 hours.
But the little element of it that I think is important to me that I want to focus on is that the power of storytelling is in its ability to incarnate ideas and worldviews, right? So I do believe that even if you're just reading the Bible and you're just reading it as a story, in fact, I'm doing that right now. I'm reading through the Bible, just reading through it, not studying it. I tend to study the Bible, but I'm just reading it as the story that was written, right? And right now I'm up to Joseph, and I believe that the power of story is so much so that even if you're not really consciously thinking of what you're learning, you are drawing from that story because of the nature of human drama incarnate in events and chronologies and the moral choices and consequences that occur. It's like modeling it. It's modeling it, right? So when you're reading about the choices that a good character may make, for instance, you're affirmed that these good choices lead to these good consequences. When you see a bad person doing the bad consequences that lead to bad choices, you are affirmed, whether you like it or not, whether you think so or not. You're being affirmed of that viewpoint, right? So I do believe that, which is why I'm not as concerned about these days. I have, how should I say it? I'm not as concerned about having to explain all my stories. I tend to like to do that because I like the theology behind them, and I have no problem doing that. But sometimes I'll have people read my novels and they'll say, I don't agree with your theology, but it's a great story. And I'm like, that's okay. I don't need to debate you about the theology. Go ahead and just enjoy the story, because I believe that despite that, the story will get through to them in a deeper way, unconsciously, than they're aware of, in terms of pushing them in that direction of the theology. And it's not something that happens mentally or cognitively. It's something that happens in the soul. And I get that. I get that from the Bible. One of the books that I wrote later on was called The Imagination of God. And in that book, I tried to explain how I, as a Christian, have struggled throughout my life as a sort of a schizophrenic or a bipolar, or whatever you want to use, of an imagination and an intellect. I love intellectual things. I love scholarship. I love philosophy and theology, but I also love great stories. I love movies. I love, beautiful paintings and stuff. And as an artist, that becomes a battle sometimes in my soul, trying to, have the imagination and have the depth, but you don't want to become preachy or pedantic, but at the same time, you don't want to tell stories that are just meaninglessness and absurd, or just flights of fancy without any meaning or purpose to them. So somewhere in the middle is what I seek to accomplish. But despite all that, I still believe that stories affect us whether we think they are or not. And the simplest level would be in terms of moral values, like I've already explained. When you see characters making choices and their consequences, that's an affirmation of lifestyle choices, whether you agree with it or not. You're seeing it lived out, and you're like the book of Proverbs, right? You're seeing it lived out through human drama. Now, and it's another thing to say, you read the book of Proverbs, and it's great, and I believe, and I believe in Proverbs as such, but I also believe that showing a story that lives out those Proverbs has another way of connecting with our humanity in a way that Proverbs can't do so directly. And because I believe that we are both rational beings and imaginative beings. Some people might say emotional beings or existential beings. So because we're a complex of issues, truth can get to us both through rationality, which would be philosophy, theology, et cetera, or through the imagination. So in my life, I'm focusing on the imagination in terms of my calling, but I'm rooted in a love for the theology and the truth. And so, that's the long rambling way of answering your question, that I do believe it affects you whether you think so or not.
Well, what's interesting is, you are familiar with the Goslings podcast, because I think you've been on a couple of times with them. And I just spent the majority of my Sunday with Jonathan Goss this weekend. And it's funny, we got on a very similar topic, because, he is also a novelist. And so he was talking about the same thing, about how the overlaps, that sometimes they're almost, to tell a good story the way you want to tell it, you almost have to take a little bit of creative licensing with theology, but without getting into the realm of heresy, So, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. See, here's the thing: that storytelling. Now, when I say that, I would say it can apply to all art forms, but that's my focus. In storytelling, the value of good art is the ability to capture and express the multifaceted perspectival nature of reality So that while I'm not a relativist, I believe though that we as human beings don't have a singular viewpoint. So you can look at truth from a multiple perspectives and draw different truths, right? So in the same way, good art, good storytelling is ultimately, and I've written about this, where I think good storytelling is about a clash of worldviews. It is kind of a dramatic incarnation of a logical argument, which means you have two views, the hero and the villain. And of course, the hero is the positive view that we believe in about life or reality. And the villain's view is what we believe is wrong, a wrong way to approach life or reality. But the clash of those characters is a clash of them living out their worldviews. And the victor, of course, is the superior worldview. But in order to do so in a way that's persuasive, or shall we say, not even needing to be persuasive, just needing to be truthful, as a limited human being that I am, a good story is going to have the heroes and villains won't be black and white. In other words, a villain will be rooted in somewhat of a reality out there, at least a viewpoint that sees itself as the hero. So you have to, when you tell a story, you have to show opposing viewpoints within a story as accurately and fairly as you can. They call that steel manning, right? You, in a logical argument, you steel man it, right? Not straw man it. This is why when you see a story, and the villains, whatever, Snidely Whiplash, or, the villain's like this, lecherous, adulterous Christian who claims to believe in God. When you make your villains into these absurd caricatures, they're not satisfying stories, are they?
Yeah.
But the more realistic you can make that villain and actually in some ways, make it persuasive. What is the best way of living out this worldview that I'm going to disagree with, but I've got to be fair to it? That's the bottom line. And that's where the honesty and integrity of me as a storyteller comes in. I want to accurately portray opposing viewpoints, even though I don't believe in them. And a great example of that is my last movie that I made within this last year, My Son Hunter. And My Son Hunter is a political satire of Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, no one in Hollywood would distribute it, so you got to go online to see it. MySonHunter.com. Yeah, I wonder why. Yeah. Well, anyway, what I did was I didn't want to do a documentary because that would be boring for me personally. I see value in documentaries, but there was just so much information that it would just be this relentless barrage of information. And even telling it as a story would be that way. So I chose to do the political satire route where you could jump around, jump in time, jump back and forth, make pithy comments, but also include a lot of the most important, pertinent, relevant facts, but do so in the context of humor. It allows you to get a lot more information out, and the context shapes it, right? And so what I'm getting to is, but when we wrote that, when we told that story, I talked to the producers, and we're like, we're not out to demonize Hunter Biden, because we actually saw the Hunter Biden life as being a tragedy, a true tragedy of a person who's been given so much and has squandered it. But it's also a family tragedy of a father and two sons and the dysfunction that occurs, which is really quite universal. In some ways, they're high up in the echelons of power, but it reflects a common family dysfunction that many of us have experienced in life, right? And so I thought that was very fascinating and interesting. Not, we have the political component in there, but I didn't tell the story in order to be a political story. That was the context of, to me, which was the human story of this tragedy of Hunter Biden and his father in particular, and their relationship. And so the consequence was that even though all the left media outlets just totally pissed on the movie, they just hated it, it was because it was so poignant. And some of them actually admitted that, they actually treated Hunter pretty sympathetically, and some of them this is how blinded they are by ideology, which is what I don't want to be as an artist, right? Even though the story has a point of view, I want to be as honest as I can about the opposing views. Well, some of them even said, the filmmakers, I don't think they realized it, but they made Hunter empathetic, which is really kind of funny, thinking, in other words, they were assuming if they made a movie about their political opponent, they would demonize
exactly
him.
Right. That's exactly right.
They couldn't understand humanizing this. That's how deluded so many people are.
Boy, that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes about the mindset of what journalism has become. They cannot fathom a world in which a story tells itself without a bias, you know?
Yes.
Or with
not just journalism, the arts, Hollywood,
Absolutely.
right? So Absolutely. Hollywood has gone woke, and now we're seeing terrible, terrible renditions of stories, you know, the new Snow White, you know, and it's just like, and it's all driven by ideology. They are not interested in entering into a different world with different views and to accurately portray that view despite their own view. No, they have to transform views that they don't agree with, transform them into their own views and to demonize opposing views. And that's what they're doing with the movies. And that's why people are pulling out from movies in droves, like myself included. I'm in the business, and I'm even like, I'm not watching as much of this stuff anymore, because it's just not satisfying storytelling. You know, all the action movies now have to be led by, you know, 5'7", 130-pound females who are kicking the butts of 200-pound men. It's just absurd, but it's literally every action movie now, except for a Tom Cruise, you know, a handful of guys, but it's just so ridiculous. I don't even watch action movies anymore.
Well, and even those guys,
so
and even those guys, if you follow the story arc of the newer movies, you know, they're along the way. This last Indiana Jones, you know, the female lead character, you know, who is his niece, his daughter, his something. In any case, along the way, she's pointing out to him how old school he is and how he needs to get with the times. So even the new roles that they're, you know, even the big names that are still starring and carrying, you know, the heavy hitters of the movies, even along the way, their characters are getting shown their error of their ways and their thinking and how old school they are. You know? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm sitting here thinking about the different ways that I feel like you've tried to blend together the right side and the left side of the brain, if you want to put it like that, in your movies. You know that. So I'm preaching this week on the rich man and Lazarus, and I've come to the conclusion that Jesus is telling a fictional story of true events, true life characters. That everybody in the world would have known exactly what he was doing by mentioning Lazarus, whom I believe he had just raised from the dead, and by mentioning a rich man who is wearing purple and linen, which is what the priest wears, and who has 5 brothers, which is what Caiaphas had, and like all these little details in the story. And as you're talking about My Son Hunter, you know, this is one kind of genre where you don't have to preach at all. I mean, the subject matter speaks for itself. And so it's like you suddenly become free to just be able to tell a story. And then like what you said is you freak people out by actually telling the story, even though they know full well what the story's about. I think it's exactly what Jesus is doing. But yet you've done different approaches. You know, you've written, you know, you write all these books on the Nephilim, but then you have these nonfiction books, or you'll have appendices at the end of them, or you have footnotes in them. Where, I mean, who has footnotes in their fiction books? Brian Godawa, like that's it. And I just think I've always thought it's so interesting that you're trying to both tell a story without interrupting the story, but find a way to get the background material into people's brains so that they can understand it.
Yeah, now that would be typically criticized by most in the, say, for instance, in the fictional world. You know, you do not footnote novels. Right. You're not supposed to do that. Right. But the reason why I did, and so I'm deliberately breaking the rules, but I'm doing it so consciously. And one of the reasons why I footnoted my first novel series, which was Chronicles of the Apocalypse, is because it deals with the Book of Revelation and a viewpoint about the Book of Revelation. And we all here know that people are very, very extremely committed to their views and radically opposing viewpoints. And so if you're going to tell a story about Book of Revelation, and it's not a view that people aren't interested in, or they're very dubious of, if they start reading it and they'll go, where did he get this from? He's making this up, because they're so unfamiliar with it, right? And I just knew that in the world of eschatology, Christians are the only ones going to be reading this anyway, and Christians don't mind things like footnotes because they like to look up stuff in the Bible. And I'm like, so I'm going to footnote it, and I didn't care, But
so at very least know how you came across, even if I'm going to disagree with you.
And by the way, I tell people it's only there if you want to look further, but you can just read over the footnote. And by the way, they're end notes, not footnotes. So they're not in the way as you're reading on the page. You go in the back if you want to look up and find more, right? But what happened was, by the way, I got the whole idea of writing appendixes after novels from Michael Crichton, one of my favorite authors, because he would write an appendix at the back of each novel explaining the science behind the science fiction he was writing. Yep. And I always loved that. So I'm like, so what if people don't want, like purists, let's say, purists are the ones that, if you feel like you have to explain everything's in your novel, then you're not a good novelist or not a good storyteller. And it's like, sometimes I don't want to have to explain things. I just want to let the story just do its work, and that's fine. And sometimes I do that when people approach me, but other times I just realize, what, people really appreciate it. And a lot of people have told me that. A lot of people have said, I love the footnotes or the appendices as much as I love the novel. So I've been affirmed in that, so much so that my latest novel, which we're here to talk about, Cruel Logic. So I changed genres, which is dangerous to do as a writer, but I changed genres to write this, what I call a theological thriller. It's actually a story about a serial killer, kind of like Silence of the Lambs, that type of thing. And so it's in the modern day. And I did end up footnoting and noting that as well, not as much as usual. But the reason why I did that was because the story is about a serial killer on a woke college campus. And the things that I have happen in the story are all drawn from the news. But also there's a lot of professors in what they're saying. And I wanted, rather than writing my own version of it, of what these professors say, quoting various authors, I actually wanted them to quote various authors, whether it's Carl Sagan, Richard Dawkins, Sam, who's the atheist guy, Sam Harris. I'm like, what? I want to actually use their words because they're very potent, iconic words. And I think that that's the level at which I'm dealing with this ideas, but I didn't want to, I don't want to plagiarize them. So I would footnote where, if they're not literally quoting like so-and-so says, but they're just saying the words, I would put the footnotes so that people realize, hey, I'm not exaggerating in this stuff. This is actually stuff people actually say, because the logical conclusion of the novel is a very brutal reality.
Yeah.
So you, we might as well go to the Cruel Logic. You had done a short film called Cruel Logic some 20 years ago or something like that, right?
Yeah. I'm ashamed to say that.
Why would you be ashamed to say that? You got what's his name from Arrested Development to play the main guy.
Yeah, Tony Hale. Yeah, he was great. Tony Hale. So what happened was, I've been a Hollywood screenwriter, and years ago I wrote this script, Cruel Logic. And that was actually inspired by one of my old favorite apologists way back in the day. His name was Walter Martin. And Walter Martin was like back in the 60s and the 70s. And Walter Martin was a rascal. He was a plump guy, lively guy, really enjoyed him. And he was a fighter, but he also had a good sense of humor. And he was talking on this Long John Nebel show from back in the 60s. I was listening to the tape.
So he's the Kingdom of the Cults guy, right? Yes,
Kingdom of the Cults guy. And he was talking on the show about how he's talking to atheists, and he's trying to explain to atheists, you have no foundation for your morality in atheism. And he's like, yes, I do. I believe murder's wrong. He's like, well, yeah, you believe it's wrong, but you don't have a foundation to believe it's wrong because your atheism doesn't provide it. And the guy couldn't get it. In other words, so many people, so many unbelievers as well as believers, they think, but they don't think about their thinking. They don't think beyond just the level of thoughts. They don't think about the way they're thinking and where they're getting their ideas from. And so Walter was saying, like, he gets so frustrated. He says, so finally I just got frustrated. I said, okay, look, It's 1940s. I'm a German Nazi with a gun pointing at your head. You're a Jew. Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you. And of course, it shut the guy up because he couldn't give him anything. And that never left me. That just haunted me. And so by the time I was a screenwriter, and I always wanted to embody that because I've always loved apologetics. And much of my Christian faith has been, and growth as a Christian has come through apologetics. I've loved philosophy and theology. And to me, it was a perfect embodiment of the moral argument for the existence of God. The typical, probably one of the biggest problems that most people have with God and his existence is what's called the problem of evil, right? How could there be an all-loving, all-powerful God with all this evil, right? And many people think that evil is that strongest argument against God. I believe it is psychologically or emotionally, but certainly not logically. But what's interesting is I now believe that is the strongest argument for God's existence, because without God, there's no morality at all. And people don't understand that. And they don't understand their own beliefs are contradictory. So the best way to do that is to say, okay, if we were to live by your ethics, by your morality, if you believe man is an evolving animal, therefore morality is evolving, and morality is a social construct that is, utilized by people to control others, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, if you really believe that, then if someone lived out according to your beliefs, this is what it would look like. And of course, it's shocking because most unbelievers don't think through their beliefs to the logical conclusions of them. And so, I speak about this. This is the apologetic side of it. But at the end of the day, I also believe that I want to tell entertaining stories. So I love serial killer stories. I love a good thriller, right? And I thought, well, you know what? Philosophy can be very boring, as can be theology from some people, right? But if I can combine it into the world of a thriller with a serial killer, it might be an interesting way for them to think about these things like they haven't before.
Yeah.
That's the entertaining component of it. And so I came up with this idea, and it was this. It was, what if there was a brilliant killer who was a philosophy professor? And what he would do is he would capture university professors and he would debate them. And the topic of his debate was his moral right to kill them. So he would ask them, okay, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I shouldn't kill you, and I'll let you go. And of course, atheistic worldviews have no foundation for morality. So they try and they struggle, but they can't. And it's more complex than just that simple premise, but that's the setup. And then we also see the story of a cop and a psychologist trying to track him down. And there's also a story of a evangelical Christian who goes to the woke college campus, and he starts to be pulled into this journey of social justice. And it leads him down to the point in his life where he has to make some life and death decisions that are quite dangerous, And so, in fact, I'll send you the link. You can play it or something. I forgot to do this because I was so busy. I've made some commercials, little 30-second spots for Crew Logic. And and so that's the premise of it. And then where that journey takes us is the rest of the story.
I mean, so when I read this, Brian, you sent it to me a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, I couldn't believe what I was reading in one way, because here you are embodying the apologetic method that I've adopted 25 years ago into a fiction novel. Like, this is so incredible. Nobody else has ever even, I don't think, thought to try to do something like that. So it's just genius. But the reason why I really wanted to have you on the show is because I just think that what you've done, especially in tackling the social justice and cultural Marxism component of this, I think it's, in one way, it's one of the most important books that a person can read in our day and age. It's a totally different kind of importance than, the supernatural stuff that you've been writing on, I've been writing on. Because you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with really the downfall of a civilization. We're in its death throes as we speak because of how this stuff has infected our culture. And I mean, I was just laughing out loud to myself. I have a highlighting in my book of all the red things, and that's kind of all the Marxist comments, and then all the green things, which are like all the truth comments, and like the whole thing is just packed with them. And I mean, you got like every single possible comment that I've ever thought of or ever heard anybody say with cultural Marxism in this book. You can use it as a handbook for you know, for this. So
that was my goal. I thank you for seeing that. And yeah, I think that one of my strengths is I can draw from a lot of sources and embed them within my stories, but you don't have to recognize that to appreciate.
No, you don't.
I think people like you will go, that's from Marx, you know, like someone may say something like, you know, the point or the philosophers have sought to speak about the world, but the point is to change it or something like that. And that's a quote from Marx. I may not say a quote from Marx, but there's a lot of those statements in there because I wanted to embody their views. But I also wanted to do it in a way that you don't have to be an intellectual to appreciate it. And so, or, you know, I say intellectual, say a scholar, you know, you don't have to be a scholar, but if you are, you will appreciate a lot of those references. So that's the balance I want to get there.
I got to ask you, how much time did you spend like in research and looking up specific things between the point that you first started writing the book form of this to the end of it?
Wow. Well, you know, here's the thing.
I know in one way it's kind of like a lifetime of research, and you've been thinking about it for 20 years, but at the same time, it's so specific. And I just thought, as I'm reading it, I'm like, this would take me years to be able to compile this into something like that.
Okay. Well, I've always been on top of the woke growth for the last 5 years, not on top of. I follow it as various conservative commentators address it, and I was introduced to that. But interestingly, what happened was, so I was aware of it, and you know, I like to keep up in the news. So I was also aware of what's been going on in college campuses as the woke thing goes. But I never studied it deeply. I just knew it from a news perspective of what's going on, and here's some of the ideas. Here's what they say, and wow, that's amazing. That's shocking. Then I might read a book or two here or there. That's about the depth of it. But while I began writing this novel, also that's when someone sought to bring critical race theory into a church. And because of that, I stopped working for 3 weeks, and I finally boned up on all the critical race theory materials, books about it, books by critical race theorists, Delgado, those guys. And of course, in the context of all that, it's not now critical race theory is that racist theory about, you know, whites are inherently racist and we all have privilege and we need to give up our power, and as if we have power, and you know, that sort of specific derivative. But it all comes from critical theory, which is more rooted in postmodernists and the Frankfurt School. And where the most I learned about that has come from a couple different authors. One is James Lindsay, who's been writing a lot on the woke reality, and Christopher Rufo. I highly recommend them, but also Jordan Peterson. You know, these guys have addressed a lot of this stuff as it occurs on campus. So that's where in that 3 week, that's when I deep dove while I was, so it happened fortuitously, right? When I'm writing my novel, it's like, oh, it's a good thing I did, because I learned a lot more that helped me. So it was like 3 weeks of in-depth, just reading and taking notes and stuff. And, you know, and like I said, then I'm always just interested in current events to some degree, and going deeper than just the political level, but philosophically what's going on, you know, because I always do think in terms of civilization. So in the novel, Cruel Logic, one of my protagonists is Joseph Kallinger, and he is a clinical psychologist who also teaches at the school in psychology. And he's kind of like a Jordan Peterson, you know. He's not Jordan Peterson, but he was inspired by Jordan Peterson. And there's this Jordan and some other guys are in this camp of intellects who are defending Western civilization, and the Judeo-Christian component of it, while they themselves are not necessarily Christians.
Yeah.
So you've got Douglas Murray, who's just brilliant, you know, and then you've got Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson, and these guys. It's just amazing how, but I find their goal to be truly fascinating, and I discovered that by and large, Western civilization has been, you know, almost completely excised from higher education, but not fully. In fact, it was just within 5 years ago that Stanford students had sought to bring back some Western civilization requirements to their school. So that was kind of shocking to me. Wow, even at Stanford, there are some students who are willing to try to stand up for Western civilization. And that was intriguing to me, because that, to me, that goal of trying to save Western civilization in the university became the overriding metaphor for what was happening in my story for Cruel Logic, right? Because as a civilization rejects God, the consequences is the ultimate denigration and devolution of that civilization, right, into chaos, anarchy, and evil. And so that's the big picture concept that I see in that journey. And so I wanted to, but I also, it was like, it's so fascinating to me because I have nothing but massive respect for Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray and these guys. And I sit at their feet and learn from them. But it's so interesting to me that they can be so positively affirming of Christianity and yet not be believers themselves. And so that was also an issue that I wanted to wrestle with in my story, because what is that? What makes that difference, you know? And I'll leave it to the readers, to the audience, to read the novel to see how I work through that issue. But it was a genuine, honest question, you know, like, what is it like to be that way? And then what are the ramifications of that? So, yeah, you know, one of the dominant themes throughout the whole novel is, on many different levels, is ideas have consequences.
Yep.
And whether you're Christian or non-Christian or whatever you let in and whatever you start to promote in terms of ideas, people end up behaving logically consistent with that eventually.
Absolutely.
So I didn't ask you this question ahead of time, and I'll keep it delicate. If you want to answer it, feel free. But when you gave us the novel, you told us a little nugget about the names. And as I'm reading the names, I'm literally looking everyone up. I'm like, no way, no way, no way. First of all, what was going through your head? And do you want to tell everybody about this little nugget, or do you want them to go and figure it out themselves?
Ooh, that's a good challenge. You know, the apologist in me wants to explain it. But yeah, no, there's some Easter eggs, and you know, so.
Honestly, most people, I don't think hardly anybody would ever get what you did unless at least they're made aware that there's something to go and look for.
Fair enough. And by the way, that's the way I wanted it, because it really was nothing more than, as an artist, you seek to craft your art so that every aspect of it reflects the theme that you're dealing with, right? Every aspect of the story. And it doesn't necessarily prove anything. It's just a creative means. Yeah, and so I'm dealing a lot with human nature. And of course, in the context of crime and evil, right? And you've got a serial killer going on there in the university. And the whole question of course, classical questions that have always been around, you know, not only the problem of evil and the existence of God, but human nature. Are we basically good or basically evil? And then what's the cause of criminality? Is it nature or nurture? I wrestle with all these issues because it all comes down to this human understanding of human nature and where you get that idea. And as a Christian, you know, I argue for original sin, for total depravity, the biblical view that we are essentially evil in our natures. And so therefore, before God, we all have a need or an obligation for salvation. And the humanists do tend to believe that man is basically good, you know, And so one of the ways that I thought I would capture, but specifically, you know, I do have a view, what you might call the reformed view, which is total depravity. And what that is that it's not just that man's bad, but that, and it's not even that man is as evil as he can be.
Right.
But it's that evil has affected every aspect of who we are, not just our moral nature, but even our intellect, such that we use logic to manipulate logic to justify our evil, right? So it's called the noetic effect of sin, meaning all of our faculties as human beings has been stained by sin. It's not just that, oh, we got a little badness in us, you know what I mean? Like, but it doesn't mean that we are all completely as thoroughly as evil as we can be. However, if we take our beliefs to their logical conclusion, what would that look like, right? So I decided to, use as the naming convention for all the characters in my novel. I decided that I wanted to name every fictional character in there was based on the name of an actual serial killer in history. So I had to go to like serial killer encyclopedias. I had like hundreds of names, right? Because I didn't just pick any old name. I wanted to pick names that were also seemed germane. And of course, I'm not going to use names like, some names that people would recognize. I didn't want to use real recognizable names. Gary Dahmer, you know, I mean, I'm not going to use that, or John Wayne Gacy, right? So I had to find names of serial killers, and I was amazed to find out how many really serial killers there are in history. It's really disturbing. And that was, of course, to be an expression of that, in a sense, that same serial killer nature is in each of us. That's a creative way of communicating depravity. But there's one character who is not, whose name in the story is not based on a serial killer. It's actually the detective. His name is Cornelius Van Til. And of course, he's an obscure.
The second I read that, I started laughing out loud.
I know. Yeah. There are a few people like you. And Cornelius Van Til is, in my mind, one of the greatest apologists in the 20th century, and hardly anybody would know him. But he's sort of the apologist whose approach to apologetics has influenced me probably among the most. And this whole embodiment, even though I told you I got this idea from Walter Martin, I think the particular approach to the argument about evil and the way I take it is kind of rooted in Cornelius Van Til's apologetics, right? And but there's also something else. But when you're reading the novel, it's like they're just arbitrary names. I'm not saying, don't be looking for something like, does this name represent something? Or, I was just picking names that would work within the story. But I also decided to, for kicks, I thought I would, how college campuses have names on all their buildings, I wanted to make that more interesting. So I decided to name all the buildings on campus after one of the possible suspects of Jack the Ripper. So, so I've got all those, not all of them, but again, you're not going to see, maybe you may not see your favorite name in there. I think I do have Walter Sickert Hall. Yeah, I do have that, but there's a lot of names that aren't in there, but I just drew from that again, just as a creative sort of Easter egg. I see it as an Easter egg. There's no deep, profound thing other than just wanting to have every aspect sort of reflect that thematic meaning. And if people pick it up, fine. If they don't, it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is creating the beauty and letting God use it in people's lives however he wants. But of course, for a program like yours, I'll be happy to explain it because I know that your audience will appreciate that kind of a thing.
Yeah. I wanted to go to the Van Til thing for a minute, just because, I think we will have some listeners that will be familiar enough with what's going on there. It was interesting that you brought up Walter Martin using this argument. My understanding is that it's called the transcendental argument for the existence of God. And it's basically the idea that I think Bahnsen and Van Til talked about the impossibility to the contrary, your worldview follows these logical paths, and you have these arguments for why God exists, why he doesn't exist. And what people don't often talk about is that when you're using things like reason, rationality, logic, you're actually borrowing from God's world just to use those things in order to then turn around and say that he doesn't exist. And so I really, really enjoyed how you were able to embody the transcendental argument for the existence of God. And you even, at one point, you brought in a little bit of classical apologetics for, the design argument, the cosmological argument, and stuff like that. And you used, I think, in a good way, and I don't want to rip on classical apologetics. I think it has value. I think Van Til has value. I think there's probably weaknesses in both, but you show
absolutely
something that that I think a lot of this is kind of the honesty part. You show in the classical apologetics that there's more than one way to go about arguing the design argument, and atheists use those arguments in the exact opposite way that Christians do. And so it's kind of like, to me, I've thought for a long time that at the end of the day, you're kind of left with just this impossibility to the contrary argument that Van Til talks about. And I think it's such an incredibly powerful argument. And the very fact that you use it as the basis for your serial killer's, reasons for, give me a reason, I'll let you go, sort of a thing. Yeah. I just thought it was amazing. So you want to talk about a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, you're right. That goes to the honesty component. As a writer, I don't, how can I say it? I mentioned Steel Manning, or the idea of being honest about your own failures or flaws or weaknesses in your own view or what have you. And of course, arguments for the existence of God, been around forever, teleological, ontological, right? But I actually do believe that some of those, the ways that many Christians use those arguments, free will argument, right? I actually believe that they're not good arguments, logically speaking. Now, that's not to say that they don't work with people emotionally and all that, but there are, and that's something that Christians would be afraid to, like, what you're saying, because they confuse. This is what C.S. Lewis brought out, one time. He said he'd gone to a debate, and he felt he had actually lost the debate. I think it was when he was with G.E. Anscombe, and she was actually a Catholic, so she's a believer, but she was demolishing his arguments, and he's like, he felt really sad, and he goes, well, it's not because I believe I was wrong about my beliefs, but I realized that people could confuse an argument for the existence of God with the existence of God, which means an argument for the existence of God may not be a good argument. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right, it just means that's not a good argument. And I think that we're afraid to face those things. And I had to come to that point where it's like, yeah, I've often had problems with the traditional arguments for the existence of God. It's like, and I'm like, I'm going to show that. I'm going to show that because I'm not afraid to deal with weaknesses, even within the Christian faith. I have a Christian character who goes to the college, and he's struggling with porn, which is a very, very common thing in a lot of male Christians' lives, something that a lot of Christians don't want to talk about or are afraid to talk about. And I also deal with beliefs that he has about the end times and all this that place him in a easy prey situation because they're not well equipped to deal with true unbelief or good arguments from unbelievers, that kind of thing. And so I wanted to be honest about that, and I think what you were saying before is a good way to say it. How I might say it is, the transcendental argument for the existence of God is basically the biggest proof for God's existence is that without him, you can't prove anything at all.
You can't prove anything
the
at all. The
moral argument for the existence of God is without him, you can't argue morality at all. The scientific argument for the existence of God is without him, you can't have science. In other words, God is the only foundation for all these things that we assume or presuppose in our own dialogue. And I said this earlier, where it's like so many people, Christians and non-Christians, assume so many things when they're talking or they're arguing, and they don't realize that they're begging the question. They're assuming these things like science, well, I believe in science and I'm an atheist, and science disproves God. And it's like, you don't realize that if you're an atheist and you have no foundation to believe that there's the uniformity of nature, so you cannot argue that the past the future will be like the past, which is the very foundation of inductive reasoning. It's like you have no basis to argue for that. You can't even have science without some kind of God, and I would argue the triune God, basically beneath as the creator of the universe, because otherwise the atheistic worldview says ultimately at bottom, everything is really randomness, right? The universe is random, right? Evolution is random. And so you have no proper philosophical foundation for the very thing that you are arguing. You don't think about your own thinking. You don't think about the foundations of the things you're assuming. And I want to get people to think about these and go back further in the way you're thinking. Oh, is this just a philosophical trick? Is this a philosophical parlor trick? Is this a theological tactic? No, what it really is this. It's Romans 1. It is the belief. Why I believe in doing that is that the unbeliever is not a person who just simply is not persuaded by the intellectual evidence of God. And that if you can produce the right argument, show him where he's wrong, give him enough evidence to believe in the Bible and such, then he'll become a Christian. No. The unbeliever hates God and doesn't want to know God. And he, in fact, he knows God and suppresses that truth and unrighteousness. So really, all of the unbelievers' approaches to science, reasoning, they're all attempted covers to keep that knowledge of God suppressed so that he or she does not have to be accountable to their creator. That's how I see unbelievers. And I don't see them as just, basically decent people. And yeah, they're smart. And if they just had enough evidence, if they could just see that their arguments are wrong, then they'll realize, no, they won't. The only way they'll realize it is by the Holy Spirit actually changing them.
That's right.
But as I'm talking to them, my goal is to argue, not here's enough evidence so you'll believe. It's no, you already believe, you already know God. You're suppressing him. And everything that you're saying to me proves that you're suppressing him because you are engaging in reason. There's no foundation for reasoning in atheism, only in the triune God. You know God and they're suppressing him. The only reason why you're arguing science is because you do know there's a God who's the foundation of that science, because otherwise you couldn't engage in science. That's kind of a gist of the transcendental approach to arguing for God. It's not just a philosophical thing. It's actually trying to apply the spiritual truths of the Bible to your interaction with unbelievers.
I've always said that the same operating software, if you will, that basically was the downfall of Satan, pride, arrogance, is very prevalent in the operating software of the atheist. A lot of it is the arrogance, that innate arrogance and pride to not admit that we are not the be-all, end-all as a race, as intellectuals. So yeah, that resounds a lot with my way of thinking as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny too, because here we are talking about this in-depth philosophical apologetics argument. It's always my fear that people are going to go, well, that's not very entertaining. It's like, oh no, it is. That's just our geeky side coming out.
It's relevant. It's so relevant though. It's so relevant. And the thing is that unfortunately out in the world, out in society, that in large part we're needlessly losing the argument, losing the narrative, and much like you say, a lot of it is seeing that you're not really arguing to convert the atheist. That's the Holy Spirit's position, but you can defend the faith successfully. Absolutely.
Yeah. There was Mike Heiser wrote 2 novels. He didn't get to finish his third. Somebody's going to have to write that for him. But when I read his second book, The Portent, he had a whole long section in there about the birth of Christ on 9/11. And it was really interesting because he, his main character was kind of himself, a theologian kind of a guy. And for just this one little section in there, I thought, well, this is just Mike the theologian not knowing how to write fiction very well, because he basically just used this character to give a 30-minute seminar on the birth of Christ that he does on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I bring this up because because the way that you do it in the book, even though you're kind of doing the same idea, you're not doing it in the same, like, just kind of tacky sort of a way, because he didn't know how else to get it across, I think. And it's funny, in his first book, he didn't come across like that at all to me. It was much better, kind of a novel story sort of a thing. But yeah, so just for people that are like afraid of being geeked out by it, I don't think they need to be at all. I want to say one other thing about the argument, that just for some people that kind of know about the history of the apologetics, it's interesting to me that now you've brought up C.S. Lewis and Walter Martin, and neither one of those guys are Reformed. And in fact, there's whole articles on C.S. Lewis and the transcendental argument in philosophy journals that you can go and look up, because this isn't something that's just peculiar to Reformed theology. This is something, like you said, that's really going back to Romans 1 and our, the noetic effects of sin that is over all of us. And every Christian, if they really are a Christian, believes in total depravity, whether they want to state it like that or not. They believe that we're all sinful. And so really what you're doing with that argument, doesn't matter if you have Tulip as your guide or not, is you're trying to wrestle with that. And I think that the transcendental argument does a great job of using the effects of sin and our rationality in a way that the other arguments for existence of God just don't do.
Exactly. I'm not like a person who will just condemn all other ways of doing. No, I mean, God uses different people in different ways to touch people with different psychologies, different, needs and such. But I want to pursue the strongest argument to me. And that definitely struck me in my pursuit to understand my faith and how to defend my faith. When I came across that transcendental approach, right, it was the most impactful to me that I've ever experienced.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people have never run across the argument before, Brian. I think the cosmological, teleological, those arguments, those are kind of in our evangelical vocabulary, and most people, when they hear them, they go, "Yeah, I've heard that before." The argument for design, a watch doesn't make itself, sort of thing. But I think this is another one of the reasons why people should read the book, is because to familiarize yourself with an argument for God's existence that you may not have ever heard before, and really feel the power of it through the embodiment of the storytelling, I think can be pretty helpful for people.
Yeah. My goal was to be like the R.C. Sproul of storytelling. One of the things I loved about R.C. was
he hated presuppositional apologetics, by the way.
I know. But I loved how he was, I called him the working man's theologian. I even love that sort of like blue collar accent that he had, and, but he would challenge his listeners to raise the bar on thinking, but he didn't get caught up into academic, gobbledygook. He tried to challenge them to think a little bit deeper, but he also made it very relevant to them, to our lives, as much as possible, but raise the bar. And that's what I want to do. It's like, I wrote this thinking, you know what, I'm going to write what I really love, and I'm not going to try to preach anything, but I want to write the level that I want to write. And I want to challenge people to think a little bit, but hopefully it'll be in an entertaining context so that it'll help them as they do. Like, do you ever see you ever see a movie where you're brought into this different world? One of the ones that always comes to my mind, which is an older movie, but it's not the only example. There's lots of them. Wall Street. Remember that Wall Street movie, with, what was it? Michael Douglas. Yeah. Anyway, I remember when I first watched that movie, like The Big Short, right? They pull you into this world of whatever it is, like Wall Street was all the day traders and stuff, and they're running around, they're talking to each other, and you can hardly understand what they're saying. You can figure out a little bit of it, but you get this sense of the authenticity of it. Like this is this world, and it's fascinating. and I can understand just enough that I can follow the story and enjoy it and feel like I've been introduced to a new world, you know?
I literally watched The Big Short last night for the first time.
Oh, yeah, really? Oh, yeah.
And I thought the exact same thing, how much detail went into the writing of it, because I got stuff flying over my head. I mean, I know as much about the housing market as the next guy.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing, and the art, the talent in the writing to work into the script, the explanation of the big terms, and not make it sound like they're doing that, you know?
Exactly. That was my goal as well. By the way, The Big Short was one of my inspirations for My Son Hunter. You know, you break the fourth wall, you talk to the audience.
That's fantastic.
You know, all that. And like you said, you got to cover all this complex information. How do you make it interesting? You put it in this quick world, but you explain just enough of it so you get the gist and it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was an inspiration for My Son Hunter as well. But there's another example too that I was thinking of. Yeah, but anyway, so it's that. Oh, and then I wanted to pull people into the woke college campus. And again, drawing some real stuff that has gone on, and you get in this campus world, and it's just insane what they're doing, right? And and as you're brought through it, and you hear all this diversity, equity, and inclusion dialogue, and you have all these AIT tests to test your implicit bias, and all this stuff is going on. But I try to communicate in a way that you get the gist of what's going on, which is this is basically the rise of fascism that's seeking to destroy our civilization. And I mean that literally, destroy.
Yeah.
And the goal is to reduce the culture of chaos, so that a police that will rise up and take control. Of course, they'll be the police. They want to be the ones that control that. So this is the current sort of protest culture that we now have, comes from the university, you know, just like the 60s, right? But it's driven by a very distinct strategy and worldview, right? And that's what becomes the Antifa, but also the BLM protesters. All those people been influenced by that university, woke, postmodern sort of reduction of everything to power. This is why you always get the accusations. Oh, you're just a white man who you don't want to give up your power. You're just got white privilege because you got all this power and you got all this privilege. And they are deliberately interpreting everything as power, and therefore those who have power are oppressors and those who don't have it are the oppressed. And then that justifies their attempt to overthrow it. And one of the means by which you accomplish that, if you're sick and tired of the incremental, if you want things to happen fast, is chaos. You reduce things to chaos. And so the Antifa, and again, I drew from Andy No, a very amazing writer who's written about Antifa, had his own life threatened. He almost died being attacked by them, and they're still seeking to destroy him. So I draw from writers who know about what's going on with Antifa and the kind of things that they're actually doing and their goals and what they're planning. And I try to bring all that into the mix as well, because all of that still originates in that original university intellectual neo-Marxism. It basically comes back to that. You know, it's an attempt to start a revolution. And what happened was the Marxists of the olden days saw that the economics theory didn't work, especially as America, capitalism just, saved the world basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what happens was they shifted to cultural Marxism. That's where you've got the postmodernists and the Frankfurt School, who and they come over from Germany and France, and so their goal was, okay, rather than capturing the means of production, that's Marxism, rooted in economics, they wanted to control the production of meaning. It's like swapping of the words, right? In other words, if you control the source of information and the means and communication of information, then you will control the culture. And so that's what they've done. And that's what we're in the process of now. And that's why they have speech codes and censorship. All that is part of suppression of dissenting voices so that they can reinforce their own power views on other people. And they believe everything's reducible to power. So therefore, if everything's reducible to power, then they justify themselves grabbing power, however, by whatever means necessary, right? And that's the more activist component that is going on in that woke world, again, rooted in the university. And I tried to bring out what is that leading us to as well.
Well, and you go
there's a
back,
civilizational conflict, you know.
And you go back to guys like Jordan Peterson. You know, we wouldn't know Jordan Peterson had he not taken such a strong stance against that. I mean, he said, "I will not be bullied," you know, and he said it as an academic, and that's it. I mean, in as much as it worked for him, and it, you know, catapulted him into being a household word, a household name, it could very well have worked against him too, you know, but it was his audacity, his, you know, that's bravery. That to me is courage. And I dare say that there are other Jordan Petersons out there, and they don't know if they want that, as the kids say, they don't want the smoke, you know? So, but that's absolutely right. That's very inspiring. And the irony is that, is how convinced this demographic thinks of their moral reasoning. The fact that Antifa is the leading edge of the sword into fascism. It just is, you know, but they're convinced. They're convinced otherwise. They're convinced that their cause is just.
One of the things that I do in the novel is that I show the power. I show the war of words. I explore the power of language for justifying one's actions and behaviors. So, for example, you know, in the beginning of all this, when I was still learning about wokeism and all that, and I would wonder, like, I remember even years ago, like, wow, why would they use such extreme language calling Republicans Nazis? It's literally absurd. Yeah. And then, of course, you know, Trump was Hitler, or DeSantis is Hitler. They called Ronald Reagan Hitler, by the way, too, but it was more subtle back then. But you know, and then why would the Department of Justice, which is controlled by the Democratic Party, why would they seek to define parents protecting their children or actually parents exercising their right to go to a school board meeting and express their beliefs, that's the foundation of America, right? Freedom of expression and such. Why would they define those as domestic terrorists? It's like, that's absurd. Like, everybody knows that's absurd. What are they doing? Why are they calling the J6 an insurrection? That's obviously absurd. It's a bunch of idiots maybe who got out of control, you could argue, but it's like, insurrection, that means like armed, trying to take over the government. And it's like, what is this language all about? Well, now I know, and now I understand. It's that the postmoderns, first of all, believe that reality is not knowable. Some of them may believe there is no reality. Reality is just whatever you define it as, right? This is where we get this notion of social constructs, right? Reality is a social construct. Your sex your gender is a social construct. They don't believe that there is either a reality, or if there is, it's not knowable. So all we have is different people from different identity groups with different perspectives defining reality as they see it, the individual.
Your truth or my truth. Yeah.
Right. So if you believe that reality is certainly not knowable, or maybe not at all, it's just, well, then how do you access the reality that we live in, right? How do you access power and control? Well, you control through the use of language. They believe that language actually is how it shapes the way we think about reality. Now, I would agree, language shapes the way we think about reality. That's why they're so focused on changing definitions and words all the time, because they're guiding us to their view of reality, right? Now, some of the postmoderns would actually believe that since there is no knowable reality, language is all we have. Language is reality. That's our reality. So therefore, control the language, control reality. To a certain degree, they're right in the sense that it controls how we think about it. So this is why we're always changing the words, even way back to, not just Nazi euphemisms like the abortion thing, pregnancy is, an unborn child is actually a fetal tissue cells and all that. Euphemisms have been going on forever, but specifically the political pursuit of power, you define your enemies in extremist terms that mentally and morally, according to our conventions, justify violence, right? Because domestic terrorists, right? When we hear domestic terrorists, we think, oh, that's the basic, or white supremacists, right? You think, oh, those people believe they're superior and others should be slaves. Domestic terrorists are people who usually use violence to achieve political ends, which often results in murder, right? So they're linking Nazis are genocidal. So they're trying to link these extremist, violent, genocidal terms with their political opponents, the Republicans or conservatives. And then that's what ultimately justifies their violence against us. So it begins with economic violence, right? They cancel you, they demonetize you, they stop you from being able to use your banks, right? They get you so that you starve to death, which is ultimately murder. But nonetheless, they start with economic violence, but the ultimate goal is physical violence against the conservative body or against the Christian body. They want to imprison us and get us out of the way so they can control the reality. And we are the impediment of them controlling reality because our views are the Judeo-Christian Western civilization views. That's why the university is so focused on getting rid of Western civilization. It's the bulwark against chaos.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Jordan talks about it just from a Greek perspective, the logos, and the power of the logos. And from a Christian perspective, of course, we believe that the logos, it's the word. And so we believe that the word has power, and you can have perverted views of it like word of faith and stuff. But nevertheless, like you said, the word is powerful by itself because it influences things that then influence other things. Yeah. And, we just happen to believe that the word is incarnate in the person of Jesus. And that makes us different from even the Greeks and their Western civilization.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about that is, it would seem like, at least in defense of conservative ideas, we really are the last bastion in the world, because you look at places like England, they've won, they have succeeded. Canada, they have succeeded. You use the wrong euphemism, misplaced term at the wrong time, they will run you out of business or put you in jail. Yep. And I believe, Brian, exactly what you're saying, that the word, the weaponizing the word, or the redefinition of them, as well as, believe it or not, and I don't want to get too far, too out in left field out of this, or right field, I should say, the Second Amendment as well. Those two things get moved out of the way, and they win. They straight up win.
And that's one of my complaints about the right, or about conservatives, is that we're good at complaining, but we don't engage in tactics back. Yeah, and I'm not saying to be exactly like them. Like, we should be using language war back.
Absolutely.
And to some extent, there are some who do. But why is it that? But we don't do it on a systemic level. Like, for instance, they will go, these parents, go to these meetings, and then the DOJ gets alerted to it, and they're told, well, use the word domestic terrorist, because then that justifies the DOJ getting involved, right? That's what that was about. And then DOJ says, we didn't call it domestic terrorists, but they colluded with each other to use that term in order to justify them, right? But then all the news media picks up on that, and then all of them start referring to them domestic terrorists. So we need to do that, but we don't do that enough.
No, we don't.
Yeah, we need to, when we're referring to things, we need to now we sometimes, we do, like with the pro-life cause. Sometimes we've done that. It's funny. In the last 5 years, I've seen a stronger willingness by pro-lifers to really call it murder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it is murder,
Yes.
right? But it's like, I realize that there's a lot of women in the movement, and they feel like that using that terminology makes the women feel put off, etc. I don't agree with it, but I understand their desire for compassion. But the truth is, we need to call things what they truly are, because that will bring about the brokenness and repentance that's required, right?
Absolutely.
But I don't say that glibly. I mean, we need to think these things through but recognize and use language to get definitions of reality back to what they should be.
I feel like a lot of I think back often to the election that John McCain ran as the Republican ticket, and I remember watching him come out on stage the week after the Democratic convention, which had Hollywood involved and had the big moving lights on stage and the rock bands and rap artists, and then cut to the Republican convention, and no disrespect to him as a man, but walks out under one spotlight, this tired old man. And I thought to myself, we're done. We are done. And it felt really hopeless as far as being a conservative. But I feel like there's been an influx of younger blood over the last 10, 15 years that's given us the likes of the Ben Shapiros and the, Candace Owens and whatnot. So I feel like the more reinvigorated younger crowd is bringing a little bit more boldness, because if you are a conservative and you're a younger person, just those two factors already makes you a strong and bolder person in today's climate.
It's just, if you're going to survive, absolutely. Yeah. And we have Daily Wire is making good movies with good values in them. They're getting involved in, they've published books. Conservatives have to have a vision for culture. Absolutely. And that's where we're failing, because, and by the way, as a Christian in Hollywood for many years, I've seen this. Unfortunately, Christians and conservatives still don't believe in culture enough to invest their own money in it.
Yep.
And it is a high risk investment. But the truth is, when I've got friends who've made movies, and when, even friends who've made this Ronald Reagan movie that's going to be coming out soon. It's really good. Yeah. But, you'd think that, okay, these conservatives getting together, making a Hollywood movie with Hollywood actors and production values about Ronald Reagan, you'd think you could get the conservative billionaires and millionaires to fund that movie, because they had to. It took them 10 years, and they only got half the funding they needed. So they made a good movie, made a very good movie with a lot less funds. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like conservatives, when it really comes down to their own money, no, unfortunately, they are often the cliche that they're accused of being, which is you just care about money and you don't care about the culture. Yep. But admittedly so, money, movies are a high risk business, but nevertheless, left-wing people don't care about losing their money if they can control culture or change culture.
Absolutely.
And they believe that for so long. And that's the predicament we're in. But now we do have some parallel economies that are being created. Yes. Daily Wire is an example of that. The Angel Studios, right? They just put out Sound of Freedom, which is 180 million, and they're chosen, and they're doing it, and it's like, yes. And
you know what? And they've made a statement, which is important. Yeah. They made the statement, like you're saying, that it can be done, that it should be done, and that we do, as conservatives, have spending power. That's a very good point. Yeah, absolutely. They made a big statement.
I think there's a couple things going on as you guys are talking in my mind. One is just kind of this, I don't know if it's just evangelicals, but maybe this Christian bubble thing where we've been living in the, creating all this Christian art and Christian music and all this kind of stuff. And it's very hard to get our minds out of that. It's one of the reasons why, Brian, I wanted to talk about the stuff at the beginning that we talked about, because I figured we might end up getting here sooner or later. But also there's just this, there's this Romans 13 thing that I've been seeing with a lot of Christians that kind of use this submit to your government passage, which is certainly biblical text and has its own context and whatever, but it's almost like they've been using it universally, like this is the only thing that the Bible has to say on the topic. And going back to the rich man and Lazarus just for a minute, just because it's on my mind, because what I'm dealing with this week, if I'm right, Jesus is doing a very similar thing to what you're doing in writing this book, and it's invading the culture with political subversion. And I think we just we're seeing more of that. We need more of it, but we also need to have places like this where we can talk about why we need to do that, how you should do that, kind of more of the explanations behind it to get people thinking about it.
Yeah. Like I say, it's been my life's goal. You roll with the changes. I remember when I first started out, I wanted to just be a Christian. I wanted to be a Hollywood screenwriter who happened to have Christian worldview in his stories. I want to do Hollywood movies with Christian worldview. Yeah. My example had always been Chariots of Fire or something like that, or Braveheart, But the world has changed dramatically. And those of us who are as the commanding heights of the economy, of the culture, have been captured by leftism, and particularly this virulent strain of leftism, that we call wokeism. Well, it's become very hostile and very destructive against us. So it's no longer a marketplace of ideas. They're actually hunting us down to try to destroy us and not allow us to have a voice. And Hollywood is a perfect example of that. They became very extreme within the last few years. And there's many of us who have sort of left the business and are starting these parallel economies. But this is a good thing because it can be a good thing. Like I say, you just roll with the changes. Okay, well, if I can't get a movie made in Hollywood, I'm going to make it outside the system, and that's okay. And there's different ways to skin a cat, which maybe cat lovers would not like to hear. But,
instead of
we're gonna get letters from that.
Instead of the Christian bubble thing, it's like whatever you make of this, with what happened with Bud Light, and just how much money they've lost in the last few months because how woke they went. Some dude come out with a beer. It's called something like the unwoke beer or the non-woke beer or something. And he's getting in all these stores. And, it's like out of necessity, we're being forced into these marketplaces. And I agree with you. I think it can be a very good thing.
It's not ideal, but it's the creative mind at work. It's like when you have the passion, you will find a way. Okay, they won't let me do it this way. I'll do it another way, Right. So back to the Christian ghetto, though, that the Christian ghetto has been something I've dealt with all my life in terms of not wanting to be a part of. It's this sort of like Christians who want to do creative things, but they're so they don't understand the creativity biblically enough. They think creativity is only a means to an end of telling a sermon. And so they try to embody sermons into their paintings or their stories or movies or whatever, Christian songs, right? And it's created a lot of bad art, And I think that it's gotten better over the years. Christian movies have gotten a little bit better, but there's still a lot of bad stuff out there. I always wanted to avoid it, but now I'll do it. If it can be a good story and I can tell a good story, I'll do it because I'm not against it. It's just that it had often been so poorly done. But now, like I said, we're pushed into this corner where it may be the only place you can get work if you're a Christian, and that's okay. I'll live with that. I'll do what I got to do. In other words, we don't see ourselves as victims. Yeah. But back to the Christian ghetto thing. So this is another component of cruel logic. I have a character, Danny Rains, who is a Christian coming to the college for freshman year. And he's brought up in the typical evangelical subculture where you've got all the Christian music and movies and Christian high school and Christian this and Christian that. And he hasn't really been equipped with a strong biblical understanding, theology, if you will. It's very cultural. It's very cultural Christianity. So he sings a lot of praise songs, but he doesn't really have depth. And because of that Christian ghetto context, he becomes easy prey because he doesn't have the weapons or the strength to be able to really counter the attacks of the enemy of the anti-Christ culture that the university is coming at him with. And this is another sort of motivation for me writing the story, was this new phenomenon. It's not really new, but the new word is called Christian deconstruction.
Yes.
Or Christian deconversion, right?
I was just about to bring that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just hear a lot of these Christian celebrities, you know, they're going on podcasts and talking about their deconversion and, you know, whatever. And it's happening a lot in colleges as well. Of course, it's nothing new because, you know, it's been since the dawn of universities. Christians have been going to school, universities, and losing their faith because they're ill-equipped. But this new reiteration of it, it just is like, I've been noticing it, and I thought, you know what, I want to tell a story about that in this context and try to capture what I think might be the reason why Christians are easy prey, and in so doing, in showing those consequences of certain ideas of the way you're living your Christian life, hopefully you can see a sort of the impossibility of the contrary. In other words, hopefully you'll see the way to counter that, or to at least begin to equip yourself so that you can counter it better. And but again, you can't do everything in just a story or just a novel. Sometimes all you can do is hint at or point in a direction. It's not like I'm going to give all the answers, because a lot of times art is for asking questions and challenging people to think deeper than they have, but you don't always have all the time or space to give answers. Or if you do, it can be very propaganda or very preachy. So you have to embody your truth in such a way that it's there and it can be understood, but sometimes only for him who has ears to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the end of this book, I think with both your main storylines, makes you do that. It leaves you like, what?
That's all we'll tell people.
I love it. Yep, that's all I'll tell you.
Well, and you know,
go
ahead, please. Go ahead.
I wanted to be hard hitting, and I wanted it to have impact, but I also want truth to be there. And if you are thinking and understanding, you'll pick it up. But it's not an easy answer ending, and it's not a Christian novel ending.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think that's important, though. That's very, very important. We spent 3 years, Doug, working on Angels and Giants.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when I was asked, what do you want to see come out of this, my thinking was the exact same thing. I want people to think. I want people to study. I want people to read, because I believe the revelation of the Holy Spirit comes at those times. And it has to start with that curiosity. It has to start with that bug being planted in somebody's mind that says, I never thought about that, you know? So that's absolutely spot on.
Got two more questions for you, Brian. They're related to each other. The first one is, because it goes back to your short Cruel Logic film. You did not sound happy with it, and you didn't really explain why. So my question is, if you could do that short film over again, what would you do different?
I did not sound happy with it?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you sounded like you didn't like it. Maybe I misinterpreted you.
You may have, because I do. I'm proud of that. I actually loved it. Good. Yeah, no, I really did. What I was unhappy with is the fact that I couldn't never get the movie made.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But I tell you what, now it's like I think Cruel Logic should be a series, actually a streaming series. Now I don't think it would be. I couldn't make it as a movie. There's too much to it.
Yeah. So my second question is more specific, and it deals with the stuff that you've been writing before. So you said that it's kind of strange to completely shift the direction that you've been going, and you've been doing the supernatural stuff now for 10 or more years, but you were in that Cruel Logic world before that. So my question is, and I couldn't really tell reading the book, I couldn't really tell what your answer might be to this, but given that you have this whole supernatural worldview in your head, and you brought up chaos earlier, and it reminds me of Leviathan and the stuff we talk about on Iron and Myth. Do you think that you would have written this book differently before you came to the Sons of God, Nephilim worldview, than you ended up writing it?
No, no, because I literally did write it a decade before I even came to the Heiserian understanding.
Right.
Yeah. No. And in fact, that's another thing too. It's like there are different genres, and you could do. I could do a thriller that has a supernatural element to it. I wouldn't be against that. I just, I wanted to try something different in this sense, So, so I actually might have if the novel does well, I have some ideas for a series, not continuation, standalone novels, but also theological thrillers that wrestle with this notion of ideas have consequences and the existence of God and serial killers. I figure that's the best way to get people into theology and philosophy. Combine it with serial killers, then that's what I'll do.
I love it. I raised that question just to let people know that this really is a different genre. It's a different, totally different thing that you're doing. And I'm really thankful that you're doing it. I'm glad that you took the time to be with us on the show today.
Absolutely.
And you're awesome, man. I've loved our friendship for so long. So
amen. Absolutely. I will be continuing those series, by the way. I've still got 2 specific ones that I know I want to write, 2 novels in the Chronicles of the Watchers that will sort of complete the whole package better than I ever have before. So, now I've got to do 2 different series at the same time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off.
Serious question, how many hours a day do you work?
Well, I mean, I'm always working, and this is my full-time job. The problem is that, and, I mean, it's hard to say because even though I kind of work all day and night,
right?
I kind of don't because I watch movies at night. That's my work because I'm ingesting fiction for my storytelling. Also, all throughout the day, I do lots of errands. I work on things in the house. So the fact that I might be working till 9 o'clock or something doesn't mean I'm truly working all that time, So, but then at the same time, I've got so much because I am a individual sole proprietor of my publishing business, right? I have to do everything. I'm a self-published author. I have to do everything. That means marketing. And so I've spent 40% of my time on marketing that I don't want to, but I have to. That's how I sell my books, And so there's always so much to do when you've got your own business and particularly when you're a self-published author. It gets depressing at times because I really wish I could write 6, 7, 8 hours a day, but there's no way I ever can because there's just too much other stuff I got to do, including real life, and I have a wife and who I love dearly and involved in my church. And so it's a balance for sure. But when I'm working on a particular project, a particular novel, I'll get a good day and I'll get 8 hours of writing, but that's a really good day. Yeah. Normally it's with all the things I got to do, breaking up and everything, I'm lucky if I get 4 hours, 4 and then pushing to 6, but then my goal would be 8 to 10 if I could. And sometimes I'll push it if I'm really on a roll and I got to keep writing, I can get a few days in like that. But realistically, it's about 4 hours or so a day writing. But there also isn't. I'm also researching while I'm writing. Like I'll stop and go, oh, I got to research that before I write more. Then there's marketing, then there's life interruptions. So it's just it's a mixed bag of time. But yeah, I mean, it's full-time job though, for sure. And I probably work more than most people I know, with their day jobs and stuff. So, but I love it and it's my calling.
Do you have a hard time or how hard, I should say, is changing your mindset, making that transition from the mundane, the day-to-day, even the marketing, to making that transition to the creative?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's one of my biggest problems is I actually, psychologically, I need a chunk of time to write, which is why I need at least 6 hours. 6 hours is that's a good chunk of time because there's a lot of psychological buildup that you have to get back into your mind and get back in the swing of things. And it takes a couple hours, maybe an hour or so before you really get back in. And then if you're interrupted, and even if it's just one little thing, just go to the store and get this and come back. It's like, yeah, but then you start all over again. And psychologically, it's more devastating than you would think well, it only took you 10 minutes to go do this. What's the big deal? No. It's like, I've got to just be writing because as I'm writing, all that I'm writing is building up in my brain. All that I prepped to write is building up in my brain. And then I'm planning everything that I'm getting to, and I'm building it all, and it's all filling up my brain. It's got to be there for me as I write. So if I have to start all over, it just goes down to zero, and I got to build it back up again. So that's why for me, it's only a good day if I got 6 hours in. It's like, okay, that was a good day. 4 hours, not so much.
Do you shield yourself? Do you get extreme about shutting out the world and are you able to? Because I know sometimes, especially like like Doug, you've got kids,
yeah.
So sometimes
I don't have kids.
Yeah. So how much do you shield yourself when it comes time to write?
A little bit, but I mean, and then there are times where if I'm on a stretch finishing something up, I will. Yeah. I can do things like not answer the phone, not answer email. Like I'll turn off my email so I'm not alerted, so I can keep writing, and I'll do that occasionally. But in general, I don't. Here's the interesting thing. I did discover this though. There is a component of creative writing that, despite what I just said, there are still enough moments where it's like I'm so overwhelmed in what I'm writing that when I can get to a stopping point and think, I just got to take a break and get away from it and not be thinking about it because I need to come back at it fresh. So that's where you go, you check your email, and then you get caught up before you know it, you've done stuff online for an hour. But I still sometimes I actually do need to like pop my mind away in order to come back and see it fresh. So there's that. It's just, there's no real pattern. It's all fluid in terms of the needs and what you do, for me at least. Yeah.
But the beauty of being your own boss.
We had, you gave us your early version of the book, and I liked your little notes in the back that said like, see chapter 34. I'm assuming those will be gone by the time that most people read it, right?
Yeah. Oh, I did give you an early one. I wonder which version
give me a
you were
little
reading.
insight into what your little mind does as you're thinking about a certain thing. I thought it was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. And I did make some pretty significant changes near the end. I just don't remember which version I gave you, so be interesting.
Yeah. Well, we hope that, this podcast and others that you're doing will be able to help you with the marketing side of this, Brian, because it is a lot of work. Where can people go to find all your work, and when will the novel be out and all that kind of stuff? Well,
I'll send you a link that you can give everyone, where you can go to get the book Cruel Logic at Amazon, exclusively at Amazon. It's going to be paperback, Kindle, and audiobook, and hardback as well, all available. If you want to know more about me, Godawa.com is my website, GODAWA.com. Although the truth is, and there's a lot of cool stuff on the website. I wanted to make it a really interesting website. But the truth is if you go to Amazon and look up my name as an author, there's a lot of information you can find on Amazon related directly to the novels and such. Everything's explained. So that's where you go to purchase. And Godawa.com is where you go to just find out other information on me.
Brian, thanks so much for coming on. Short notice kind of, but so glad that you did it. And we're hopeful that, this is going to be something that will help you out. And, this is just such a great book, and it's so important. Just the topic, the subject matter, and the fact that it's a novel doing the things that we talked about that most people just put into a theology textbook. That right there is worth it, and people need to be reading this book. I hope that they'll go out and get it.
Thanks a lot, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it, Doug. It's an honor, Doug, actually. So thank you for having me.
This guy's a machine in how much stuff he writes. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
So if you guys have liked this podcast, wherever you're at, give it a like. Subscribe, do all the things that you need to do, push the buttons, do everything. Let the like button know that you're there. And remember that it's the glory of God to conceal things, but it is the glory of kings to search them out. This have been Giant Steps.
My name is Charles Cullen. They call me the philosopher killer. Some call me insane. But Aristotle said that no genius has ever existed without a touch of madness. Some say I am evil, but I say I make my victims face the consequences of their own ideas. What about you? Could you defend your beliefs if your life depended on it?
Cruel Logic, The Philosopher Killer. A brilliant theological thriller novel by Brian James Godawa. Readers are saying the most thrilling novel you will read this year. A page-turner with shocking twists. Get it now at Amazon.com in Kindle paperback and audiobook.